Hi, it's Katrina.
Number 10. Secrets of the Sahara. One of the strangest places in the world is a geological phenomenon in the Sahara Desert. It's called the Reichstadt structure, and it's officially labeled as a sedimentary rock formation that was created over millions of years. A rock dome slowly eroded and exposed the underlying rock. And the result of the erosion is what you see today, a suspicious eye made of symmetrical rings in the middle of the desert. Modern scholars say the formation is at least 100 million years old, made from nothing more than ordinary volcanic activity. However, not everyone is convinced. There are those who believe that the Reichstadt structure is an ancient ruin, possibly all that remains of the lost city of Atlantis. Plato was the first scholar to describe Atlantis around 360 BC, and according to his writing, the grand city was destroyed by the gods around 12,000 years ago. It was an island nation that was ruled over by powerful kings, guarded by rings of land and wide canals of water. Plato's description of the city matches what the Reichstadt structure looks like today, an island of concentric rings. Conspiracy theorists aren't the only people interested in the Reichstadt structure. The CIA recently declassified documents about something called Project Magnet, but it's not clear exactly what happened in the project because the bulk of the document is still redacted, meaning the details have been removed from the paperwork. What the document does show is that in the 1960s, the CIA embarked on a secret project to study the eye of the Sahara. The official explanation is that they were doing a geomagnetic survey to learn more about navigation and satellites. But if that were the case, why did they erase almost the entire document? And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time! I wanted to give a big thank you to Min and Stuart McAdam for supporting this channel. We're very lucky to have amazing viewers like you guys. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Number 9. The Vela Mystery. On September 22nd, 1979, a bright flash was picked up by the U.S. Vela 6911 satellite somewhere in the South Atlantic Ocean. At the time, it was assumed that somebody had detonated a nuclear weapon. But in the aftermath, government agencies in the United States couldn't figure out what the flash was. It's now been decades, and the mystery light of 1979 is still unsolved. The U.S. Vela 6911 satellite was designed specifically to detect nuclear explosions. From its position and high-altitude orbit, its instruments would pick up the optic signal from any nuclear device that went off. And that was exactly what it picked up on September 22nd. It was a double flash, the trademark characteristic of a nuclear detonation. So it didn't make sense that the flash was caused by anything other than a nuclear explosion. The US went into emergency mode, trying to find the source of the signal. There was a real fear that a nation secretly detonated a nuclear warhead as part of a weapons test. But who did it? Well, nobody ever figured that out. In the months that followed, US government agencies launched multiple classified investigations to find the source of the double flash. They figured that it was a low-yield nuclear explosion, likely detonated by either South Africa or Israel. And after months of getting nowhere, they gave up, and as a result, the whole thing was later dismissed publicly as an exploding meteorite. Number 8. Sea Lab. In the 1960s, America wanted a way for people to live in the ocean. So Navy physician George Bond came up with the idea to create a habitat underwater at a depth of about 200 feet. The plan was to saturate human blood with helium gas so that divers could live inside the habitat and explore deeper areas from it. The US government was truly under the belief that they could put people on the bottom of the ocean. Forget colonies on Mars. This was going to be colonies on the sea floor. This later became known as Project Sea Lab. The first iteration of the experiment involved a 57-foot-long steel tube that was lowered to a depth of 192 feet. This was done off the coast of Bermuda in July of 1964. 4 volunteers remained inside the pod for 11 days, and the science worked, with the divers experiencing no adverse effects. It was such a success that the second iteration was quickly put into action. In August of the next year, a water habitat was lowered off the coast of California to a depth of 205 feet. This time, the habitat was complete with hot showers and a refrigerator. It also had a rescue dolphin named Tuffy, who was trained to rescue the aquanauts in case of an emergency. Scott Carpenter survived in the habitat for 30 days at an immense pressure of 103 psi. To put that into perspective, that's 7 times the pressure of Earth's atmosphere. Then came the third and final iteration of the bizarre experiment. 4 years later, the Sealab 3 habitat was lowered to an incredible depth of 600 feet. 5 teams of 9 divers were supposed to spend 12 days, each living within the habitat. The U.S. Navy was heavily involved with the experiment, recreating the environment in a special hyperbaric chamber. Then, on February 15, 1969, the experiment began. Unfortunately, though, it was an immediate disaster. There was a helium leak, which 4 divers volunteered to repair. But what the public didn't know was that they'd been awake for 20 hours using government-issued amphetamines, resulting in the death of Barry L. Cannon. The experiment was scrapped after Barry's death, and the other divers were sent to decompression. As they decompressed, however, somebody on the Navy ship sabotaged their air supply. In the end, the divers made it out alive, but just barely. It's been suggested that the Navy covered up the guy who tried to sabotage the divers so that they didn't get bad press, and that was the last time the U.S. ever tried to create an undersea colony. Number 7. Blowing up whales. In 1982, there was an unofficial war between Argentina and the United Kingdom over a pair of dependent territories in the South Atlantic. The territories were the Falkland Islands and South Georgia. Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands on April 2nd, then South Georgia the next day. The British government then dispatched a naval task force to fight the Argentine Navy. It was a bizarre conflict that lasted 74 days and ended with the Argentinians surrendering on June 14th. The islands were then returned to British control. But during the hostilities, almost 700 Argentinians were killed, along with roughly 250 British. Additionally, 3 Falkland Islanders and 3 innocent whales lost their lives. During the Falklands War, British warship HMS Brilliant fired torpedoes at some whales. According to eyewitness accounts of the day aboard the anti-submarine frigate, the Navy was unable to distinguish between Argentinian submarines and a pod of whales. The first deaths came when the ship fired torpedoes at the group of innocent creatures, and the third whale died from an attack helicopter. Number 6. The Lost Amber Room. A group of treasure hunters recently claimed that they discovered the entrance to a secret tunnel that could contain lost treasure from World War II. In the northeastern Missouri region of Poland, near a place where Hitler's legendary Wolf's Lair once stood, treasure hunters found a concrete plate, and underneath the concrete plate was the entrance to a tunnel shaft. Something extremely important must have been brought down the tunnel shaft a long time ago. Somebody sealed the entrance with the plate and then covered the plate under about 2 feet of dirt. But interestingly, the area doesn't appear to have been disturbed in at least 70 years. The treasure hunters were unable to descend the tunnel. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved in digging this kind of thing up in Poland, so nobody knows what's hidden underneath it yet. One of the theories, however, is that the tunnel could contain the mythical Amber Room. The Amber Room was a fabulous room covered in beautiful amber panels and gold leaf inside Catherine's Palace near St. Petersburg in Russia. During World War II, the Germans disassembled the room and put it in boxes. Nobody knows what happened to it after that, only that it's still missing. One popular theory is that the Germans buried the Amber Room at the end of an abandoned tunnel. Some think it could be hidden in a secret cave chamber somewhere in Poland. The room is worth an estimated $500 million, though its historical value is priceless. Number 5. The Secret UFO Program. In 2022, David Grush filed a whistleblower complaint. David was the leader of an analysis group charged with investigating unexplained phenomena inside the U.S. Department of Defense. He held his position until 2023, but now he's blown the whistle. According to David, the U.S. government is aware of non-human beings that have been found on this planet. David claims the government is hiding the truth about crashed alien ships and dead extraterrestrial bodies. He also claims that the U.S. government has an active program that's been around for decades to collect crashed ships and reverse engineer the technology. You may be aware of the recent hearing in which David gave his testimony to U.S. officials. During the hearing, David explained how he was denied access to the most secret part of the program. He wasn't allowed to see the alien life or witness the retrieved crashed vessels, but during the course of his official duties, he did hear about such things. It's his assertion that the military and other government agencies like the CIA know that aliens exist and have their ships in their possession. What do you think about David's testimony? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Number 4. The Malaria Marsh. One of the most unusual instances of biological warfare happened in 1943. The German army purposely flooded the Pontine marshes that were located to the south of Rome, directly resulting in a steep rise in malaria among the civilians of Italy. Historian Frank Snowden described it as bioterrorism and a violation of the Geneva Protocol. It all happened after Italy suddenly changed sides in September of 1943. Benito Mussolini was to be arrested, and the Allies were on their way. The Germans then stopped the pumps at the marshes, resulting in a sudden surge of brackish water. The Germans did this even after they had been advised by malaria expert Eric Martini that the return of brackish water would encourage the return of malaria. And that was exactly what happened. The malaria didn't have much of a military effect. Instead, mosquitoes from the bog infected civilians and caused an unprecedented malaria outbreak. The mosquitoes also attacked the Germans, of course. Then, after the Battle of Anzio, the marshes were left on their own. There was brackish water everywhere, and the towns were reduced to ruins. The mosquitoes flourished and continued to spread malaria, and it wasn't until 1950 that the last of the malaria outbreak was finally defeated. Number 3. The Berlin Tunnel. After World War II came to an end, Berlin morphed into a cesspool of espionage and spy warfare. The city was divided into different zones, and from those zones, the individual powers conspired. The American section of Berlin was right next to the British zone of control in Zellendorf, and the CIA had a massive base of operations there. But in another section of town, the Soviets ruled with an iron fist. The Americans spied on the Soviets to see what they were doing in their section. And of course, the Soviets did the same thing. This was the height of the Cold War spy games. CIA officer Bill Harvey came up with the idea for Operation Gold. In conjunction with British intelligence agency MI6, the CIA would build a tunnel underneath Berlin so that they could tap into underground communication lines in the Soviet sector of the city. They were essentially making wiretaps, hijacking the communication lines so they could listen to the telephone traffic moving between Berlin and Moscow. The tunnel stretched from West Berlin to the underground cable facility in East Berlin. It was a genius plan, except for the fact that MI6 had a mole. George Blake was really a KGB agent inside who was working undercover at MI6. He learned of the project and told the Soviets about it during its early stages. The KGB let the operation continue, but were fully aware that the CIA was digging toward their communication cables. Number 2. Finding the Titanic. On September 1, 1985, the wreckage of the Titanic was discovered. Navy officer and American oceanographer Robert Ballard was one of the main men responsible for the find. But what the public didn't know at the time was that the Titanic was only found because the Navy lost a couple of their submarines. Finding the Titanic was just one part of a secretive mission to uncover the wreckage of the USS Scorpion and the USS Thresher. Scorpion and Thresher were a pair of nuclear submarines that sank in April 1963 and 1968, respectively. Robert Ballard made an agreement with the U.S. Navy in 1982 to conduct a joint operation. The Navy would fund Robert's search for the Titanic if they could covertly look for the nuclear submarines at the same time. They told Robert that he was only allowed to look for the Titanic if there was time left over at the end of the mission. The amount of time left over was 12 days, making the discovery of the Titanic all the more impressive. First, the U.S. confirmed their lost submarines hadn't been sunk by the Soviet Union, and with 12 days remaining, Robert was able to track down the iconic ship by following a trail of debris on the ocean floor. Robert didn't disclose the truth about the mission until 23 years later. Number 1. The Inflatable Plane. In the 1950s, the CIA developed an inflatable airplane. It was one of the bizarre inventions cooked up by the organization during the Cold War. It all started in 1958 when Alan Pope got stuck on an Indonesian island after the Indonesian Navy shot down his aircraft during a secret bombing raid. Pope was held prisoner in a jungle, though the security was pretty relaxed. The CIA came up with the idea to drop an inflatable plane somewhere on the island where Pope could find it. Then he could fly the inflatable plane to safety. It sounds absolutely insane, but hey, that was the CIA in the 50s. The CIA collaborated with engineers from Goodyear Tire to create the concept. The plane would double as a floating raft, with its engine designed to run with a special pump that also inflated the airplane. They came up with 2 concepts, but the CIA suddenly abandoned the idea. It's unclear what happened, but out of nowhere, the CIA discarded any notion of building an inflatable plane. Perhaps they realized that such an invention could revolutionize air travel, giving people the ability to build their own inflatable planes. Whatever happened, Alan Pope remained stuck in the jungle until 1962. He only escaped when the CIA organized paramilitary soldiers to rescue him. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. First swimming dinosaur. At up to 50 feet long and weighing as much as 7 tons, Spinosaurus aegyptiacus dwarfed the Tyrannosaurus rex. Known as one of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered, it lived between 95 and 100 million years ago during the Cretaceous period and possessed an extremely long tail resembling a paddle. The scientists who discovered the remains of this unique feature in modern-day Morocco described it in the journal Nature as the most extreme aquatic adaptation ever seen in a large dinosaur. The creature's vertebrae contained struts extending as much as 2 feet, giving its tail an oar-like shape. Researchers believe the dinosaur propelled itself through the water by swaying its tail back and forth. This was basically a dinosaur trying to build a fishtail, lead researcher Nizar Ibrahim told National Geographic. Ibrahim and his colleagues argued in 2014 that the dinosaur was semi-aquatic, but their theory was met with backlash from other scholars who contended that Spinosaurus was strictly a land dweller. The discovery of the oddly shaped tail was a game-changer to previous findings, however, providing the most solid evidence thus far that the species did, in fact, spend a sizable portion of its life in the water. Simply put, a tail of its kind would have no practical use on land, and its unique shape appears to be an evolutionary adaptation for navigating in a marine habitat. What do you think? Have you ever heard of this dinosaur before? Let me know in the comments below. Ancient cemetery. While hunting for dinosaur remains at a site called Gobero in Niger in 2000, a group of scientists led by University of Chicago paleontologist Paul Serino stumbled upon a large human graveyard, possibly dating as far back as 10,000 years. It turned out to be the largest known Saharan cemetery, containing the remains of fish, crocodiles, and other creatures, in addition to around 200 humans. Evidence suggests that the site was inhabited during 2 distinct periods, with roughly 1,000 years in between. The groups that occupied the site, known as the Kiphians and Tanarians, left behind more than just their corpses. Artifacts relating to their daily lives, including harpoons, bone jewelry, and arrowheads, were discovered alongside the deceased. There were numerous bizarre burials as well, including a man whose head was placed in a pot and another who was laid to rest on top of a turtle shell, as well as a woman who was buried facing 2 children. The women and the 2 children were likely buried on top of a bed of flowers, as evidenced by pollen found in their graves. Even more bizarrely, the tools and animals at Gobero seemed out of place for the modern Sahara climate. This is because they originate from a time known as the period of the Green Sahara, also known as an African humid period, during which changes in the Earth's orbit brought more rain to the region, resulting in more vegetation, water, and life forms. The TanRaset River. The Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert in the world where only the toughest wildlife can survive. But it wasn't always that way. Before the Sahara Desert was covered in nearly 3,630,000 square miles of sand, it was a humid, tropical region filled with lush vegetation and freshwater sources. Nobody knew really what was going on beneath the sand until 2015. That year, researchers studied satellite imagery that revealed evidence of a paleo river, remnants of an enormous, now inactive river system that once flowed through the dry and barren desert. This ancient river system can be found deep beneath the sands. Called the TanRaset River, it may have flowed through the Sahara as recently as 5,000 years ago. The river stretches over 323 miles. These channels are periodically reactivated during warmer climate cycles called African human periods, the most recent of which ended roughly 6,500 years ago. In this particular case, scientists believe the Paleo River system may be connected to fossil water sources and can help indicate where to find new water sources in the desert. In the meantime, scientists are keeping an eye out for what satellites find to hunt down more rivers. Libyan desert glass. For over 3,000 years, fragments of canary yellow glass, known as Libyan desert glass, have been found between shifting sand dunes over a vast area of the Sahara Desert in western Egypt, near the Libyan border. The mysterious material was even incorporated into King Tut's gilded and jewel-covered breastplate in the form of a scarab beetle that serves as a centerpiece. For a long time, scientists didn't know exactly where Libyan desert glass came from. It's made of pure silica, which can only form in temperatures of 2,912 degrees Fahrenheit or more, a temperature that generally does not occur naturally anywhere near the Earth's surface, posing the obvious question of how this happened before humans existed, and therefore without human intervention. The strange substance's origins were finally discovered last year, according to a 2019 study published in the journal Geology, which asserts that the material formed around 29 million years ago following a meteorite impact. Included in the research is the first known evidence of the collision in the form of high-pressure damage from the event. Scientists reached this conclusion based on the presence of a mineral called rhyolite that is present in Libyan desert glass. Rhyolite only forms during a meteorite impact, as evidenced by its presence only being reported at sites of this nature, meaning the substance could have only come to exist under that particular circumstance. Despite these findings, researchers have a lot left to learn about Libyan desert glass, including where the crater is located and how big it is. Monster croc. Dinosaurs weren't the only animals that favored the marine habitats once offered by the Sahara. In 2016, scientists discovered evidence of the largest ever sea-dwelling crocodile in modern-day Tunisia. Their findings, which appeared in 120-million-year-old rock, were published in the journal Cretaceous Research. Does anyone read this? Let me know in the comments below. The creature, named Macamosaurus rex for its formidable size, grew up to 30 feet long and weighed as much as 3 tons. It hailed from an ancient crocodilian lineage of species who spent nearly their entire lives at sea. Only a skull and a few other bones were recovered, leaving experts with a lot of guesswork in terms of determining the true size of Macamosaurus rex. But the region in which they were found has not really been explored, leaving hope that more complete remains will be unearthed in the future. The species had larger freshwater relatives, but boasted the distinction of being the largest ocean-dwelling member of the crocodilian family tree. Macamosaurus rex was originally one of several species thought to have died out during a mass extinction around 145 million years ago, during the Jurassic period. But the discovery of its bones in much newer rock suggests that the creature survived the extinction event and that the event was not as far-reaching as scientists once believed. Nabta Stones. A series of stones known as the Nabta Stone Circle, located in modern-day southern Egypt, marks an area that flooded seasonally thousands of years ago, forming a lake and attracting Neolithic nomadic tribes who set up camp at the site. Roughly 6,000 years ago, the Nabta people erected the Nabta Stone Circle, consisting of a series of stones measuring 12 feet in diameter. The arrangement predates Stonehenge by 1,000 years and is the earliest known astronomically aligned structure, although exactly what it aligns with in the night sky is unknown. Astrophysicist Thomas G. Brophy suggested that several of the stones point toward the Orion's Belt constellation, but this theory remains to be proven. Early people used the site between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago for feeding and watering their livestock, and evidence also suggests that they sacrificed animals there. Known as the Nabta people, the society underwent a significant change around 7,500 years ago, at which time they began sacrificing cows, sheep, and goats. The adoption of this practice coincided with a level of social organization previously unseen in the region. Numerous underground chambers discovered in the area contain the remains of animals who were ritualistically slaughtered and buried. Lake Mega Chad. A freshwater body called Lake Mega Chad once occupied a roughly 139,000 square mile area of the Sahara Desert in Central Africa, making it the largest freshwater lake on Earth at the time. In the words of the British scientists who made the discovery in 2015, a reconstructed lake-level history for the ancient Lake Mega Chad, once the largest lake in Africa, suggests that a North African humid period with increased precipitation in the Sahara region ended abruptly around 5,000 years ago, and that the lake's Bodel Basin, now a large source of atmospheric dust, may not have dried out until around 1,000 years ago. Dust from the dried-out lake began blowing across the Atlantic and fertilizing the Amazon rainforest around that time, 1,000 years ago, leaving experts with the quandary of how the rainforest received nutrients before then. Today, all that's left of Lake Mega Chad is Lake Chad, occupying just 137 square miles. It occupies parts of Chad, Niger, Nigeria, and Cameroon, and was reduced to its current size mainly by humans overusing it as a freshwater source. The lake's dried-up remains make up the Bodel Depression, the world's largest source of dust. This dust is imperative to the health of the Amazon rainforest, where nutrients are quickly washed from the soil and need ample regular replenishing. But where the rainforest acquired nutrients before the Bodel Depression existed, starting 1,000 years ago, remains unknown. Lost Libyan civilization. There's more to the Sahara Desert's hidden secrets than ancient bodies of water. Satellite photographs released in 2011 show over 100 fortresses or castles belonging to a so-called lost civilization that once inhabited southwestern Libya. These settlements, which date back between 1 and 500 AD, were inhabited by a mysterious but advanced people called the Garamantes. However, under Gaddafi, they remained unrecorded and unexplored. After the fall of his regime, archaeologists could now go in person. An early 2011 expedition to the fortresses, located roughly 620 miles south of the Libyan capital of Tripoli, yielded pottery samples confirming the Garamantes' former occupation. During the trip, archaeologists noticed the ancient structure's stunning state of preservation. At first glance, the ruins resemble something of a Roman nature, but project leader David Mattingly said, actually, this is beyond the frontiers of the Roman Empire. These sites are markers of a powerful native African kingdom. There are mud brick remains of castle-like complexes with high walls, ancient homes, cemeteries, and advanced irrigation systems, enabling them to grow plants in the middle of the desert. Knowledge of the Garamantes is limited, not only because of civil strife in Libya, but by the country's limited budget for archaeological research. So far, experts have deducted that this remarkable civilization had their own writing system, high-quality textiles, and metallurgy. With satellite imagery, archaeologists can study a large area and can see that it was once densely populated. These oasis farmers are far from the barbaric nomads painted by the Romans. The Romans fought several battles against the armies of chariots and cavalry of the Garamantes, who were famous horsemen. Rock carvings depict different kinds of soldiers that famously gave the Romans a hard time. For some mysterious reason, the Garamantian civilization began to decline in the 5th century and then disappeared. Valley of the Whales. As you now know, the Sahara Desert contained vast bodies of water on and off throughout history. Included among these was the Tethys Ocean, which existed tens of millions of years ago. Then the ocean dried up and became the desert. Remnants of creatures that dwelled within the Tethys Ocean dating back 37 million years have been found in the arid modern-day landscape at the Wadi al-Hitan paleontological site in Egypt, also known as the Valley of the Whales. One such animal, Basilosaurus, was a prehistoric whale that reached up to 50 feet long and had 2 delicate and useless hind legs. Paleontologist Philip Gingrich found a complete specimen, extremely well preserved. These legs are left over from land mammals that once walked on all fours and for some reason decided to return to the ocean. He says that complete specimens like the Basilosaurus are Rosetta Stones that tell us a complete story of how the animal lived. Over 1,000 ancient whales have been discovered at Wadi al-Hitan, and many more likely remain buried under the desert sand. These creatures could help scientists understand how whales made an apparent evolutionary U-turn, as National Geographic's Tom Mueller calls it. Simply put, terrestrial creatures evolved from aquatic animals that made their way to land where it was easier to breathe and live. Some of these species somehow made their way back into the water, and their land-designated body parts, like legs, lost their purpose. While this apparent reversion back to marine life is a fascinating feature among sea-dwelling mammals, scientists have yet to properly situate these creatures in the evolutionary family tree. Where do you put a whale with legs? Prehistoric megalake. In 2010, scientists discovered evidence of a prehistoric megalake that formed around 250,000 years ago and spanned a more than 42,000 square mile area of the eastern Sahara Desert at its peak. Researchers made the find by analyzing radar data of Egypt and creating a profile of the ancient megalake using images of wind-blown sediments produced by running water, and bedrock beneath the sand. Using fish remains as a marker for the lake's highest shoreline, they estimated that the Nile River once flooded Egypt's Qusayba-Tushka Depression entirely. At its largest, the ancient water body likely extended some 250 miles west of the Nile and sat at 810 feet above sea level. The scientists placed Paleolithic settlements close to what they believe were the lake's borders, representing desirable near-water locations. Other archaeological sites suggest that the lake was smaller at one time, occupying roughly 18,600 square miles and sitting at around 623 feet above sea level. The existence of lakes across North Africa during the early and middle Pleistocene epoch could have heavily influenced human migration patterns, thus playing a vital role in our collective history, which experts are still trying to piece together. Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!